So yeah, as Brock mentioned, I'm Kirsty and I'm Head of Ecological Restoration and Tree Conservation at Botanic Gardens Conservation International. I'm aware that this might be an organisation that some of you have not heard of. So I'm going to start by introducing the work of Botanic Gardens Conservation International, or BGCI, to all of you. So Botanic Gardens Conservation International is a membership network. It's the world's largest plant conservation network. So we have over 650 member institutions and 60,000 experts in over 100 countries around the world. So our membership is predominantly botanic gardens, and this map shows the location of the world's botanic gardens. So you can see lots of dots on the map here. The red dots are botanic gardens that are situated within global biodiversity hotspots. The yellow dots are botanic gardens that are within 200 kilometers of a hotspot. And then the green dots are all other botanic gardens that are not close to biodiversity hotspots. So you can see that there are a lot of botanic gardens in Europe and in the US, but there's also a good number of them across other parts of the world as well. And yeah, just to note that our membership is predominantly botanic gardens, but we also have forestry organisations, seed banks and other plant conservation organisations as part of that network. So to give a quick overview of the work that we do, as we are a membership network, we work to provide support to our members through regular webinars and coordination of regional botanic garden networks, providing funding opportunities to our members, and we also offer a botanic garden accreditation scheme. So I thought it would be helpful to just note the definition of a botanic garden. So botanic gardens are institutions holding documented collections of living plants for the purpose of scientific research, conservation, display, and education. And we think that's a really important definition to bear in mind to differentiate between botanic gardens and just kind of gardens that are pretty to look at or parks that are nice to walk in. So really, botanic gardens are about having that documented collection and having it for the purpose of scientific research, conservation, display, and education. And that accreditation scheme considers policies and infrastructure, conservation and sustainability activities to make sure that true botanic gardens are sticking to what that definition is. So we also work in the policy and advocacy space for plant conservation. So we have been very much involved in the development of the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, which sits under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. So we're involved in development of the actual wording of the strategy, as well as support for its implementation. And we help to measure progress towards the targets of the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation as well. So those targets sit under the Global Biodiversity Framework targets that are being developed at the moment. We also have a strong role in building capacity for plant conservation and building capacity for education programs that focus on plant conservation. We provide data to the public and to our members to guide plant conservation action. So that includes IUCN Red List assessments, other plant threat assessments, and we host a number of databases on our website, including the location and names and contact details for botanic gardens around the world. So it's easy for other organisations to connect with botanical institutions, as well as our plant search database, which holds information on living and seed bank collections that are held within the botanic gardens and seed banks around the world as well. So we also carry out technical programs for plant conservation, and these focus on conservation prioritization. So again, that is IUCN Red List assessments and helping to prioritize which plant species are in most need of conservation action. We carry out technical programs on seed conservation and also on exceptional species. So those are plant species whose seed cannot be banked using conventional methods. We also have technical programs that focus on plant health and biosecurity, a strong focus on tree conservation, and also on ecological restoration, which is what I'm going to be focusing on mostly today. So our work on ecological restoration largely at the moment is focusing on tree planting and forest restoration. And this is because current interest in tree planting and forest restoration is so high. So in general, there's a lot of interest in ecological restoration because it's the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. We also see large-scale tree planting and restoration pledges that are being made by governments and corporations around the world as well. And these are largely as a solution to combat climate change. But what we're also seeing is this disconnect between these large-scale interventions and biodiversity. So many of these large-scale initiatives are failing to deliver strong biodiversity outcomes, and many of them have a strong focus on exotic species. So a lot of the work that we're doing as BGCI, as our global network, is helping to shift tree planting programs from the kind of left side of the restoration continuum that I'm sure that's produced by SER that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. So helping them to move towards the right-hand side of the restoration continuum to be delivering true ecological restoration projects that really do deliver strong benefits for biodiversity as well. So botanic gardens have an important role to play in ecological restoration. They have many of the skills required to help deliver ecological restoration. So I started by introducing the definition of a botanic garden. So if you remember, they have to have documented collections of living plants, so they know where those plants have come from before they're brought into their collection. And they also have a role to play in scientific research as well. So actually in all parts of restoration, botanic gardens and botanists have an important role to play. So when we look at planning ecological restoration, botanists have the skills that are needed to go out and carry out botanical surveys in the field. So surveying reference ecosystems, for example, and surveying patches that are aimed to be restored as well. And then many botanic gardens also host herbarium records within their collections. So these are dried plant specimens that help with identification of plants as well. So a lot of information available and expertise available to support planning of ecological restoration. And if any of you have ever been into the field with a botanist, you'll know that it can be quite an amazing experience. Seeing them go around a forest, for example, and being able to name every single plant in there, whether it's a tall tree, a small tree, any kind of plant, they know the name without even having to look at a single book. So yeah, I'm always impressed when I go into the field with botanists, and it's a really huge wealth of knowledge that they have that's important for planning ecological restoration. So then botanic gardens as well are good at propagating and supplying material for restoration. So they have collections of living plants that can be used for restoration, but they also have a huge amount of horticultural expertise as well, which means that they can grow a really wide diversity of plants to incorporate into restoration projects. And they also have a lot of capacity when it comes to seed collection, seed storage, and supply of seeds for restoration as well. So an important role to play there in propagating and supplying material for restoration. Then still on implementation, when it comes to planting in restoration projects, they again have a lot of horticultural expertise to bring to the table, which helps to ensure that once plants are planted in restoration projects, they are looked after and that they have good survival rates as well. And because botanic gardens adopt a scientific approach to restoration, they're also good at carrying out monitoring and research associated with their restoration projects. And then because botanic gardens are open to the public, they also have huge outreach potential. So to educate their visitors about the need for ecological restoration, and many of them are very good at community engagement as well. So a lot of expertise and collections and important knowledge held within botanic gardens that can be applied to ecological restoration. So recognizing this, in 2012, the Ecological Restoration Alliance of Botanic Gardens was set up, or ERA, which is a kind of sub-network that sits under the broader BGCI network. We have about 50 members at the moment and more members signing up. And the mission of ERA is to mobilize botanic gardens, arboreta and seed banks to carry out science-based ecological restoration by marshalling their expertise, networks, and resources to help achieve the restoration outcomes needed for human well-being and a sustainable future for life on Earth. And I mentioned that we've currently got 50 members. So you can see on this slide, many of the members. You'll recognize some of the larger institutions, such as the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, Missouri Botanical Gardens, the Royal Botanic Garden Edinburgh. But we also have smaller botanic gardens in developing countries as part of our membership, such as Brackenhurst Botanic Garden in Kenya and Tauro Botanical Gardens in Uganda, who have a really strong focus on ecological restoration. So the ERA strategy for 2021 to 2025 has 4 goals. And the first one is to be developing and implementing the Global Biodiversity Standard certification, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail in just a moment. And then goal 2 is to build ecological restoration capacity within botanic gardens in local communities, academia, industry, government, NGOs, and international bodies. Goal 3 is about setting up, maintaining, and documenting a series of long-term sustainable restoration projects. And I'm going to talk through some examples of those in just a moment. And goal 4 is about building recognition of the value of involving botanical organizations, botanical expertise, and biodiversity in ecological restoration. So 4 goals there to guide the work of the Alliance. So I'm going to talk through some of the examples of these long-term restoration sites that have been set up by ERA members. So starting with Kaduri Farm and Botanic Garden, which is located in Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, there's hardly any primary forest remaining. So Kaduri Farm and Botanic Garden have planted the hillsides within the sites of their garden with native and threatened tree species. And whilst they're doing this, they are working to trial different techniques. So this includes direct seeding, tree guards, which you can see in the picture here. So individual tree guards around individual seedlings to protect them from the strong winds on these slopes, and also trialing enrichment planting as well. So by trialing all these different techniques, they've worked out the best way to deliver restoration within the Hong Kong and the surrounding area. And they're now providing advice and replicating this restoration work across other parts of Hong Kong. And the second example is Jardín Botánico de Cartagena Guillermo Piñeres, which is in the Caribbean region of Colombia. So tropical dry forest is one of Colombia's most endangered ecosystems, and there's only 8% of dry forest remaining. So this garden is taking on a leading role in research and study of tropical dry forest, and they're working to reconnect remaining patches of primary dry forest, and again, acting as a hub for delivering training and helping others to join in the restoration of this critical ecosystem as well. The next example is Kings Park and Botanic Garden, which is located in Western Australia. So they're working on restoring mining sites in collaboration with the extractives industry. And a real focus of the work that they do at Kings Park is experiments to determine seed behavior and to identify optimum seed treatments for high germination success. This includes experimenting with seed pelleting. And if any of you have been to some of the SCR World Congresses, you'll have heard from some of our colleagues from Kings Park who are really leading in research in this area. So Kings Park has a strong focus on sharing lessons learned to scale up restoration both within the region and other dryland sites across the world, and also other mining sites across the world as well. And the next example is Tauro Botanical Gardens, which is located in Western Uganda. And so Tauro Botanical Gardens has the most diverse collection of native tree species within Uganda in their arboretum. And they also have the largest indigenous tree nursery in Uganda as well. So initially, this garden was working to restore local and central forest reserves within Western Uganda, so close to where the Botanic Garden is located. And they also have a strong focus on education and outreach from the garden. So to help them scale up the work that they were doing, we initiated a joint project with Tauro Botanical Gardens and established 4 additional community indigenous tree nurseries across Uganda, and located these nurseries close to high priority sites for restoration as identified in the Forest Landscape Restoration Opportunities Assessment for Uganda that was produced by IUCN and the Ministry of Water and Environment. So within this project, more than 100 people were employed, so both to work within these community Indigenous tree nurseries, and also each nursery had its own seed collecting network associated with it as well. So we had groups of people trained and then going into the forest to be monitoring when native tree species were producing seed, collecting the seed, bringing it to the nursery. And then the nursery workers were working to propagate the seedlings. So you can see here that they propagated more than 130,000 seedlings of more than 100 native tree species within the 2 years of the project. And what was really valuable here is that many of these tree species had never been propagated before. So they were documenting techniques for making these species grow. So all of that is recorded. And although the seedling numbers aren't super high, the number of species propagated within the time frame we're really pleased about, and also this longer term output of now knowing how to propagate these native species. And over that project, they brought 130 hectares under restoration, so planting a diverse and appropriate mix of native species at each of the sites that they were working to restore. And the final example is Mulanje Mountain Conservation Trust. So Mulanje Mountain is located in southeastern Malawi, and the mountain is home to Mulanje cedar, or Widringtonia whitei, which is only found on Mulanje Mountain. So unfortunately, this tree species is now assessed as critically endangered because it's been logged to the point of near extinction in recent years. So the timber of this species, it's really durable, so you can use it for building. It's also termite resistant, so it lasts for years. It can also be used for intricate carving, so it's really popular, it's really valuable. And unfortunately, like I say, the species was logged to the point of near extinction. There were huge efforts to try and prevent that happening, even with the army involved, but unfortunately, it has been logged. And yeah, fire is also a threat to the natural regeneration of the species. So even if there were small seedlings left, fire has also wiped out many of those. And this was the dominant forest species on the mountain. So its removal has had a really big impact both on the mountain and also the surrounding area of the mountain due to increased runoff and increased erosion as well. So in this project, Mulanje Mountain Conservation Trust isn't a botanic garden and isn't a member of the Ecological Restoration Alliance of Botanic Gardens itself, but members of the Ecological Restoration Alliance supported the restoration efforts of this project. So they established 10 community nurseries around the base of the mountain and delivered training and support to build capacity, and also capacity within the nurseries, and to develop propagation and restoration protocols for this species and for the populations on the mountain. So this included Chicago Botanic Garden investigating mycorrhizal associations with Mulanje cedar, a lot of work to identify and propagate companion species to improve planting success. And I'm really pleased to say that we propagated and planted more than 400,000 seedlings on the mountain. And this project provided employment opportunities to more than 1,000 people. So really hoping that there's a brighter future for this species in place as a result of the restoration work that was put in place here. So those were a few examples from across the Ecological Restoration Alliance of Botanic Gardens. And another focus of the Alliance is to build ecological restoration capacity. So we do this by delivering practical training courses from the Botanic Gardens and from the restoration sites, but also via online training courses. We develop training resources that are available from our website. And also by running these practical projects in collaboration with partners, we also make sure there's a capacity building element in each one of those projects as well. So I mentioned that tree planting is a particular concern of ours at the moment, in that there's a dual crisis to address, not just the climate crisis, but also a biodiversity crisis as well. And what we're seeing is a lot of good intentions when it comes to tree planting for carbon capture, but often seeing some bad outcomes. So, and some of these outcomes are actually accelerating this crisis. So, for example, by promoting the planting of non-native species that displace or damage native biodiversity, the tree planting approaches can accelerate the extinction of species and can in many cases increase CO2 emissions. So the belief that planting a tree at minimal cost is a viable long-term solution to climate change, we think must come to an end. So there are various things that we've been trying to put in place to try and change the approach to tree planting, to not say you can't do it at large scales, but there are certain things that you can do to achieve better biodiversity outcomes and better outcomes overall when planning and implementing tree planting and restoration projects. So one of the things that we did in collaboration with Ecological Restoration Alliance members last year is to publish the 10 golden rules for reforestation. So this sets out the most important things to consider in tree planting and reforestation programs. So the 10 rules include things like protecting existing forest first, using natural regeneration wherever possible, planting species to maximize biodiversity, and also using resilient plant material. And this paper was published in a way that we hope that the rules would be easy for organizations to adopt. And what we've seen is a really good uptake of these 10 golden rules by different tree planting organizations around the world, which we're really pleased about. And some of them are using these rules to kind of assess how they were doing and hope to move towards better practice by using these 10 golden rules as guidance for them. So following the publication of the paper, in February last year, we held a joint conference with the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew on effective reforestation. And that conference, again, was really successful. It was a really interesting series of presentations and panel discussions, and all of those are available to watch online on YouTube. And as a result of the conference, the Kew Declaration was published, which was really trying to get the attention of tree planting practitioners, tree planting financiers, and also politicians making these large-scale pledges that best practice can be achieved in restoration, that there are specific guidelines to follow, including no planting of invasive species. And the Kew Declaration was published with signatures from more than 2,600 individuals and more than 100 organizations. And yeah, so both the 10 golden rules and the Kew Declaration really aim to highlight and provide guidance for best practice restoration. So also last year, in September, BGCI published the State of the World's Trees. So this summarized the conservation status of the world's nearly 60,000 tree species. And the report was based on work undertaken over the last 5 years, with contributions from more than 500 tree experts globally. So this was a huge effort to get to the point where we could produce this report. And a lot of this work was undertaken by the IUCN Species Survival Commission Global Tree Specialist Group. So many people around the world carrying out conservation assessments for tree species to get an idea of which tree species are in need of conservation action, where are they, and why are they threatened. So some of the key findings of that report. We know that at least 30% of the world's tree species are threatened with extinction. So that's 17,500 species at least. We know that the main threats to these tree species are agriculture, logging, and livestock farming. But climate change and extreme weather are also emerging dangers. So we think that there is huge potential to use the interest in tree planting and restoration to incorporate threatened tree species into planting programs, so you can deliver strong biodiversity outcomes by delivering broader restoration, but also incorporating threatened tree species to get strong conservation outcomes as well. So to make it as easy as possible for people to use this data, alongside the report, we also published the Global Tree Portal, which is on our website. And it has data at the global level, at the country level, and also at the species level. So to give an example of the type of data that's available on the website, at the national level, you can type in the name of a country and you will get a synthesis of all tree data for the country, and this is the first time that this data has been available. So that tree data includes checklists of all tree species native to the country. It also identifies all endemic tree species within the country, and also picks out all of the threatened tree species as well. And all of these lists are freely downloadable from the website. And you can also access information on in situ and ex situ conservation status of species as well. So we really hope that this is a helpful tool for restoration practitioners. And we completely understand that actually it's quite a high level tool, because when you're deciding which species to plant at a particular restoration site, you really need to be thinking at the site level, not at the national level. But many people do not know which tree species are native to their country. So we feel like the Global Tree Portal is an important first step for helping people identify which tree species are native to their country, and then also identifying whether there are threatened tree species that they can be incorporating into their restoration projects as well. An example from Kenya of how we're using that data that's come out of the Global Tree Assessment, following the IUCN Species Survival Commission Assess, Plan, Act cycle, we have a project that's called Mainstreaming Threatened Species into Tree Planting Programs in Kenya. So Kenya has more than 1,100 native tree species, and more than 140 of those are threatened with extinction. So we carried out a series of conservation planning workshops for all of Kenya's threatened trees with the IUCN Conservation Planning Specialist Group. And then we're now working in collaboration with partners to deliver some of the identified priority actions within that planning work for the assessed threatened species. And a big part of the practical action is about bringing threatened tree species into tree planting programs across Kenya. So we're working to build capacity of tree planting organizations so they can identify threatened species, they can propagate them, and they can plant them as well. And some of our key partners here are the International Tree Foundation and the Kenya Forest Service. So with all of the experience that our network has in terms of delivering ecological restoration with strong biodiversity benefits, in terms of capacity building for restoration and also incorporating threatened species into restoration, there's another way that we're aiming to support others to take on a stronger focus on biodiversity and restoration. And this is by launching the Global Biodiversity Standard. So this is the only certification that is focused entirely on biodiversity. And the standard addresses the challenge of tree planting programs which are inadvertently causing harm to our world's ecosystems. It provides assurance that tree planting, habitat restoration, and agroforestry practices are protecting, restoring, and enhancing biodiversity. And it applies the tried and tested expertise of the global botanical community with the knowledge of local communities to tree planting and restoration sites around the world. So the standard will protect and restore biodiversity, use the knowledge of trusted local and international experts, be objective and independent, and be accessible and equitable. So we really want to challenge that theory that any tree at minimal cost solution to climate change mitigation and adaptation is okay, and replace that idea with long-term best practice solutions that combine positive outcomes for biodiversity, local communities, and carbon capture at the same time. So as I say, this standard really does focus on biodiversity and aims to achieve better biodiversity outcomes. So we want to recognise projects that have a positive impact on biodiversity. By publicly recognising best practice, we aim to provide incentives for organisations to incorporate a diversity of native species into planting and land management programmes. We want to provide assurance to governments, financiers of large-scale tree planting, and the public that initiatives are promoting and protecting biodiversity and not contributing to its decline. And we also want to provide knowledge, data, and mentoring for policymakers, financiers, brokers, and tree planting groups to develop land management practices that protect, restore, and enhance a biodiverse world. And that last point there is important to pick up on, that it's not just about assessing sites on the ground, but it's also about providing mentorship to help organisations work towards better outcomes as well. So the way that the standard will work is a combination of a site-based assessment and the certification. So we want to make the standard appropriate for all land management initiatives, so including habitat restoration, tree planting, and agriculture initiatives. So all of these will be eligible for applying for certification. So organisations will be able to apply for sites to be certified, and depending on their impacts on biodiversity, they will receive certification, and certification will be measured against a tiered approach, so a tiered standard. And just to point out that the certification is at the site level rather than at the organisation level. So if an organisation is working at multiple sites, we won't certify the organisation. Each of the sites will be certified. So you'll really see whether the biodiversity outcomes are good at an individual site, rather than assuming that the same practice is being carried out by the organisation across all of the sites that they're working on. So the process to apply for the standard includes an online application, a remote sensing assessment, and a site-based survey by local and international experts. And the criteria for certification really build on BGCI&Q's 10 golden rules for reforestation that were published last year, and as I mentioned, were picked up by many organisations to try and independently assess the work that they were doing against those rules. So we've got 8 criteria, and sites will need to protect existing habitats and biodiversity, carry out interventions in appropriate areas without displacing natural biodiversity, manage biodiversity in consultation and partnership with local communities and stakeholders, aim to maximise biodiversity recovery through restoration and natural regeneration, refrain from planting invasive alien species, use native species and incorporate threatened species in planting wherever possible, use planting material that's genetically diverse, appropriate and resilient, and to implement robust monitoring, evaluation and adaptive management of biodiversity as well. So in terms of the partners on the Global Biodiversity Standard, we've got lots of supporters and early adopters. So we've had really fruitful discussions with large-scale tree planting consortia, including Trillion Trees, 1T.org, the Global Evergreening Alliance, Ecosia, and Plan Vivo, who are all supportive and can see that the Global Biodiversity Standard will be a helpful tool for them to work out how well the projects that they're supporting and promoting are doing in terms of biodiversity outcomes. The Global Biodiversity Standard is currently in the development phase, and it's being jointly developed by BGCI, ECRAF, SER, Traffic, the IUCN Species Survival Commission, Plan Vivo, Ecosia, and 1T.org. We had some initial sponsorship provided by Etihad Airways, and we've got some further funding in from the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And so this year, as I mentioned, we're assessing sites and we're testing the methodology in 6 countries. So in Kenya, Uganda, Madagascar, India, Brazil, and Peru. So hoping to have tested in all of those countries by the end of 2022, and soon expanding to additional countries as well. And we're really pleased to have received some early endorsements for the standard. So including from Zach Goldsmith, who's the Minister for International Environment and Climate in the UK Animal Welfare and Forests, and Baroness Jane Wolsey from the House of Lords Science and Technology Committee in the UK as well, and also Elizabeth Maruma, who is the CUD Executive Secretary. So we're really excited to be getting this Global Biodiversity Standard development going, and we really feel like it pulls together the knowledge of the ERA network, of the broader BGCI network. We're looking to assess sites, but as I mentioned, also provide training and mentorship, so to help organisations achieve certification for their sites, or to help them work towards higher levels of certification. So we're using some of the sites that I mentioned, some of the projects that I mentioned that are led by ERA members as training sites for the Global Biodiversity Standard. Many members of the ERA network will be part of the would-be assessors for the sites that are being assessed, as well as other people from the broader BGCI network. And we really do hope to expand to other countries and incentivise and support the achievement of stronger biodiversity outcomes in restoration through the Global Biodiversity Standard as it moves forwards. So BGCI also has a very strong collaboration with the IUCN Species Survival Commission Plant Conservation Committee. So I'm a member of the Plant Conservation Committee, but also the CEO of BGCI is co-chair of the Plant Conservation Committee. So IUCN, the IUCN Plant Conservation Committee is part of the Species Survival Commission. It leads IUCN's efforts in stemming the loss of global plant diversity through its wide-ranging network of plant conservationists. And we work to support and facilitate the activities of the SSC Chair, the IUCN Species Programme, and the expert volunteer network of specialist groups, task forces, and others that sit within IUCN. So to give you an idea of how broad the IUCN Plant Conservation Committee and the associated specialist groups and red list authorities are. So the Plant Conservation Committee acts as the kind of umbrella organisation for the plant specialist groups and red list authorities that sit within the Species Survival Commission. And you can see from this long list here, there's lots of regional plant specialist groups and regional plant red list authorities. So actively working to carry out red list assessments for plant species within their specific areas, and also moving through that assess, plan, act cycle. So looking to carry out assessments, plan the conservation action that's needed, and then take action to secure a future for the threatened species within their regions as well. And as well as regional groups, there's also taxonomic and thematic specialist groups. So including the bryophyte specialist group, the global tree specialist group that I already mentioned, the orchid specialist group, and thematic groups such as the medicinal plant specialist group and the seed conservation specialist group as well. So each of these groups has a really diverse group of expertise within their membership, a diverse group of experts, within their membership. And they very much are working alongside the BGCI network. So if there's a gap in expertise within the BGCI network, we hope to fill it with the plant specialist group and red list authority network, and vice versa. So an idea that we've recently come up with within the IUCN Plant Conservation Committee is to set up an advisory group on restoration. So this is according to the terms of reference of IUCN committees. We're proposing to form this advisory group, and the aim of the group will be to achieve a stronger focus on native plant species and genetic diversity across broader ecological restoration and tree planting initiatives. So it's quite a specific aim of the group. And we really have that strong focus on biodiversity again, and also genetic diversity as well. And what we really want to do is enhance connections between the IUCN Species Survival Commission and other IUCN constituencies. So helping to get biodiversity expertise spread out and linked to other IUCN constituencies as well. So we hope to do this by promoting, integrating and implementing a basic set of principles. And many of these will look familiar to the criteria, the 10 golden rules, and also the criteria that we're looking for in the Global Biodiversity Standard as well. So to conserve and protect remaining natural forests first, to never plant invasive species, to restore degraded natural forest ecosystems, avoiding tree planting in natural non-forested habitats, such as grasslands, and prioritize areas that improve conservation value. To promote the natural regeneration of forests in suitable areas and only plant trees when it's required. And some guidance on when planting trees is required. So select a diverse mix of suitable site-specific native tree and understory species, and preferably associated with native mycorrhizal fungi, ensuring that material is equitably locally sourced and genetically diverse as well. And also looking to support the development of supply chains of appropriate material for planting, including seed banks, field seed banks, nurseries, and seed orchards. So in terms of the proposed membership of this advisory group, we're looking to have members of the Plant Conservation Committee who have restoration expertise or are representing geographical regions where there's a really strong interest in ecological restoration and tree planting. And also have members that represent other IUCN constituencies. So for example, from the Secretariat, the Commissions and IUCN members that are also active in ecological restoration. And just to say, we are not trying to replace any of the great work that's already happening on restoration within IUCN, including within the IUCN CEM. but we're looking at how this group, the SSC group, the Plant Conservation Committee group, can really help others within IUCN that are working on restoration to ensure that they incorporate botanical and biodiversity knowledge within the restoration programs that they're carrying out as well. So some of the activities that we've identified for this group to be working on include to review and update the biodiversity guidelines for forest landscape restoration opportunities assessments. So this was actually suggested by the IUCN Forest Programme, and we've got a lot of people keen to help work on this. And then we'll also start looking across other relevant IUCN documents to ensure biodiversity safeguards are taken into account and that a strong enough consideration of biodiversity is promoted in the documents. So getting the group, the advisory group, and the membership within SSC, the plant experts, to have a look at these documents and make sure that they do have a strong enough focus on biodiversity. Again, this group will work to support the development of the Global Biodiversity Standard and looking to test that on some of the larger scale restoration projects that are being delivered by IUCN. Then to identify mechanisms for ensuring that plant specialist group knowledge is more extensively integrated into landscape level ecological restoration planning and implementation. So this is where I was talking about creating those stronger links between the IUCN regional teams, particularly where there's restoration opportunities assessment work happening, and create those links between the regional teams and the local botanical institutions that can contribute to that Rome work, to nature-based solutions and forest landscape restoration implementation as well. And then the fourth one is a bit of a catch-all. So just identifying additional actions, resources and tools that are required to really support better incorporation of native plant species and genetic diversity in large-scale restoration, to jointly look for funding opportunities to develop tools, and making sure that they're ecosystem and regionally specific as needed as well. So in terms of how the group will work, we want to keep the core membership of the group fairly small. So we'll have members of the Plant Conservation Committee, but those members will be responsible for ensuring that advice from the group is then shared with other plant specialist groups and red list authorities. And then equally, we'll be looking to have on that core membership group members representing other IUCN constituencies who will then be responsible for ensuring advice and outputs from the group are shared with their respective constituencies as well. And we're suggesting having quarterly meetings of the core members, working groups on specific activities, and then the core membership will also be tracking progress and reporting to the broader group as well. So a few next steps for this group. This is just at the development stage, so we're running a series of meetings at the moment to introduce both the Global Biodiversity Standard and the idea of this restoration advisory group, collating feedback and ideas on the group, and then we're requesting for volunteers to form the core membership of the group and to indicate who they'll be responsible for sharing advice and outputs with as well. And then we're keen to initiate work on some of the priority activities that I just mentioned as well. So really hoping that some of the people listening today are interested in being part of this group. And yeah, we really feel that the Global Biodiversity Standard and the IUCN Restoration Advisory Group will hopefully be able to work to achieve stronger biodiversity outcomes in restoration. Although at the moment, both the Global Biodiversity Standard and this Restoration Advisory Group do have a strong focus on plants, we're working through the Species Survival Commission, which has a broader focus. So we hope to expand to incorporate other types of biodiversity in future as well. So if you're keen to find out more about anything that I've talked about, please do get in touch or visit our website. So that's the website link for BGCI, for the Ecological Restoration Alliance of Botanic Gardens, and for the Global Biodiversity Standard there as well. I think from my presentation, you'll have seen that I'm a big fan of plants, and also I was just out doing some seed collection earlier today actually, and this bottom picture here is a frog that we found hiding from the shade of the African sun within the leaves of this lily. So this frog is also obviously a big fan of plants too. And if I just had one takeaway message from everything that I've presented, it would be to really bring in the botanists when we're talking about restoration. So as I said, it's really impressive when you do go out into the field with botanists. They have amazing knowledge. So really do think about bringing botanic gardens and botanists into your restoration projects, as we do think it really will help to achieve these stronger biodiversity outcomes in future. Thank you.
Wow. Kirsty, thanks so much. That was amazing. And all of the tools and programs you mentioned are so relevant and important. So thank you for guiding us through that. I have a few questions I want to sneak in if there's time. For participants, I see a hand raised. If you do have a question or comment, please put it in the Q&A window, not in the chat, because I'll be feeding questions from the Q&A. We have a large group, so it would take too much time to unmute and whatnot to allow individual participants to have the floor. Apologies for that. Also, I put in the chat where you can find videos. The video of this talk will be posted. There's also all the past videos in the series. And finally, I listed our May speaker who will be speaking on the topic of the restoration economy. Okay, so I'll start on a resource question, and this is from Namrata, who asks, you mentioned about seed conservation work by ERA for restoration. Can you please elaborate on that? Where and what species seeds are being conserved? Is there a place online I can read more about it?
Okay, yeah, so on our website, we have quite a lot of training materials on seed conservation. So this goes right from how to monitor species to work out when they're ready for seed collection, to actually collect the seed. So best practices for when you're collecting the seed, including things like the amount of seed to collect on the day, how to handle the seed, to really look after it, to make sure you're not damaging the quality of the seed after its collection and when it's traveled to the nursery. And then also about storage of the seeds as well. And a lot of that those training materials have been developed in collaboration with the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew Millennium Seed Bank. So the Millennium Seed Bank partnership also has a lot of training materials that are available as well. And one thing that they do host at the moment, which I think is the seed information database, which also provides information on on storage protocols for different species as well, which can be really helpful for for any practitioners to have a look at it. It's a really helpful resource.
Great, thank you. Another sort of resource question. Shalini is asking about specifically the IUCN advisory group and whether there's a web page already up for it and how to apply.
Okay, no web page yet, but the best thing to do at the moment is to get in touch with me. So hopefully, again, after this webinar, we'll share my contact details with everybody. So if you are interested in finding out more, please get in touch. As I said, we'll still be running some more detailed meetings and discussion sessions on that advisory group. So it would be great if those of you that are interested can come along to one of those meetings and share your ideas, because we are very much at the development phase. So really looking to get input from as many people as possible as we set that group up.
And since I've shared my email in the chat to facilitate that, feel free to email me and I'll pass that along to Kirsty.
Thanks, Cara.
Okay, so there's a couple questions specifically about genetics, and I'm going to add mine in as well. Also, there's a lot of comments about how useful the presentation was. So Samantha, in addition to saying great presentation, says, you mentioned genetic diversity a few times. How do you verify this in the context of the new biodiversity standard and or promote this in forest restoration projects more broadly?
Yeah, okay. Good question. So, and I think, so I'm not a geneticist, and I'd say that actually being able to do the genetic analyses isn't always possible to make sure that you definitely are capturing the right amount of genetic diversity. But there are things that you can do even in project design to really help you move towards incorporating the right amount of genetic diversity. So if, again, we look at seed sampling, you can design your seed sampling to make sure that you are collecting genetic diversity as you go. So if you go into the field, for example, don't collect all of your seed just from one plant, collect from multiple individuals. If there's multiple populations available, collect from multiple individuals and multiple populations as well. Even for large plants such as trees, collecting from different plants of the tree will help to get more genetic diversity into your seed collection, into your nurseries. And so, yeah, I think when we're running the Global Biodiversity Standard to try and assess things like genetic diversity, a lot of the questions will be around the sampling methodologies used, where the material's been collected from. Of course, ideally looking for collection, sustainable collection from wild populations, rather than commercial material used for the restoration projects as well.
Great, thanks for that. So I'm going to add my question in here too. And we've been working quite a bit with seed transfer zones for various restoration relevant species. And for those who aren't familiar with that, participants, that's zones for which you are predicted to be able to move seed without compromising local adaptation. And I got so excited to see the Global Tree portal, just having all of that information all together, really useful. I did put the link in the chat during your presentation. And I'm wondering if part of any of the efforts you're involved with has been to aggregate species for which we have information about seed transfer.
So there is at the moment a climate change alliance of botanic gardens being set up, which is looking into that, and it is something that we look at in some of the individual projects that we're working on as well. So I mentioned the work that we do with Tauro Botanical Gardens in Uganda, that's set up for Indigenous tree nurseries across the country. And there we did some mapping actually with the US Forest Service to look at seed collecting, seed transfer zones within Uganda. So making sure that when we were going out and doing the collections again, that material was being brought into the nurseries, and they didn't just separate the material by species, but they separated it by provenance as well. So when customers come to the nurseries and say, I want to plant the seeds, I want to plant seedlings in this particular site, you can advise on the best seedlings that are going to survive the best in the area that they're planting as well. So I haven't got the link to hand of the Climate Change Alliance, but I will share that with Cara so it can be shared with all of the listeners afterwards as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So we have quite a few more questions. I'm going to try to bin two together. So Linda Spencer is asking about guidance on prioritization for restoration, and then monitoring guidance tools for assessing restoration outcomes. And I know that's a really big question, but maybe through the lens of specifically the biodiversity outcomes with tree planting. And then there was another question about examples, and you provided quite a lot of examples, but this person was asking for examples in the UK and Europe.
Okay, so
that was a lot.
That's okay. On the resources page of the Ecological Restoration Alliance of Botanic Gardens website, we have a manual there on species recovery. And that one specifically is about trying to incorporate threatened species into restoration projects, or to restore populations of threatened species. And that is a full manual, and then it's broken down into guidance briefs as well. And a chapter of the manual, and then one of the briefs focuses on monitoring. And that was actually written by Mace Botanic Garden, who are based in Europe, who are really leading in terms of monitoring, particularly for the impact of your restoration on individual species within that restoration. So that could be helpful to look at. So within Europe, Mesa Botanic Garden, like I say, has some great expertise. They're a member of the Alliance. The Royal Botanic Gardens Kew is a member. So I mentioned their work on the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership. One project that they were involved with in the UK was helping to set up a national tree seed project. So actually the UK a long time ago in colonial times went out and set up tree seed centres in a lot of different countries around the world, but never set one up in the UK. So actually, when problems started with things like ash dieback and other pests and diseases in the UK, the UK was looking for good sources of resilient seed material that they could use to be replanting some of the populations. And so worked with Kew on this to develop a national tree seed programme. So going out and making collections from all of the different provenances of the species across the country, bringing those into the Millennium Seed Bank and starting to test which of those provenances were resilient as well. So there's a couple of examples from Europe.
Great, thank you. And sorry to squish too many concepts into one question, but I wanted to have time to end on this last question, which is from Giovanni. And I know, when we talk about restoration, we think about planting species, but we also think about passive opportunities and natural recruitment. And so here's a question related to that. Specific to Mexico. In Mexico, some NGOs financed by national and international programs have been promoting the reforestation of mangroves through the planting of seedlings, without considering that in many cases, passive restoration is the best approach. What would you recommend doing in this scenario? And I would say in your response, you could, go broader than that as well.
Yeah, so you'll see that in some of the criteria that I mentioned for the standard and for some of the principles that we're looking at in the Restoration Advisory Group, we do really want to promote natural regeneration if it's possible in areas. And I think that so we have some really strong members of the Ecological Restoration Alliance within Mexico. Some of them are even working on mangroves. So I think their expertise could be helpful here, particularly in terms of going out to sites and trying to work out if passive restoration is going to work, and also in terms of assessing whether the right approach has been taken or not as well. I think that is something that we'll be looking at. So did you jump straight to tree planting when it wasn't really needed or not?
There's just one more comment. I still have 1 minute. I'm going to sneak it in, but feel free to drop off if you need to. And actually, I'm going to just again promote next month's webinar, which is on the restoration economy. And I'm so happy to feature that for those of you who've been long-term participants in the series. We've mostly focused on ecological aspects of restoration. But we did have a really amazing webinar from the UN Decade Finance Task Force, and I believe a couple of other ones in the series. So this will be continuing on, bringing in more aspects of restoration. So very last question, I promise, Kirsty. And this is from Paul, who is asking, so we've talked about tree planting a little bit on natural regen, and Paul is saying that they've started a rescue plant nursery to save plants from development sites and relocate them as part of restoration and allied activities. Been successful at the small scale with lots of volunteers. And the question is, can plant rescue of eco-type adapted plants destined for clear cutting be a viable source of diverse plant material to consider on a large scale?
Okay, good question. So we have also a strong policy on not collecting whole plants from the field, except in legitimate cases of plant rescue, which is what it sounds like Paul's talking about. So I just wanted to say that point because we really don't advocate for taking even wildlings out of the forest and bringing them into the nursery. Seed collection is much better. But I can see that in the situation that Paul's talking about, plant rescue is needed sometimes. It doesn't work for every species, but it's worth a try if a road or a development is just about to come in. Yeah, it will work better for different species. And yeah, whether it's going to work at large scale, I mean, I hope we don't have to resort to it for large scale, and we can often try and prevent development projects going through, particularly where there are threatened species on the sites. But I do think it is an important approach. But yeah, just to think about it really carefully when taking whole plants out. that it's definitely a case of plant rescue when you're doing it.
Well, thank you so much again for spending your evening with us. I don't know if you mentioned to participants, but Kirsty is in Nairobi, so it's Friday night, 8 o'clock now. We really appreciate your time. This was a fantastic webinar. We'll share the chat with you so you can see some of the comments that came through there. Hope to see everybody in May on the 20th. Feel free to reach out to me. We'll keep the webinar open for a couple minutes. You can grab emails and anything you need from the chat before we close out. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.